Hello, my name is James Nicotine. I'm with Green TV, and today we're welcoming Kumi Naudu, the Executive Director of Greenpeace International, to my right, and to my left, Kim Carstensen, the Director General of the Forest Stewardship Council, for a discussion. So today we're going to talk about forests, and to begin I would like you, Kumi, to start talking to us about your role at Greenpeace International.
I've been at Greenpeace now for almost 6 years as Executive Director. Greenpeace runs the following programs: climate and energy, trying to stop deforestation, oceans, particularly trying to stop overfishing and oil drilling. We also have a special focus on protecting the Arctic, which we consider to be the refrigerator and air conditioner of the planet, as well as on genetically modified foods, and also doing quite a lot of work around toxics, such as the toxic components in toys and so on. So while each of these programs are big programs in their own right, they're all, as you probably can figure out, are quite connected. And I would say overall our primary objective is averting catastrophic climate change, because if we don't get climate change right, essentially we're putting humanity as a species under risk. And protecting forests is a critically important part of climate protection. So I would see a connection between both of those.
Okay, absolutely. Kim?
Well, I'm leading the Forest Stewardship Council internationally. What we do is that we certify forests to the highest standards around the world, getting together members who are members of Fsc, members in an environmental chamber, groups like Greenpeace, like WWF and others, members of a social chamber, indigenous peoples, trade unions and other groups with social interest in forest and economic interest in forest, getting them together to define what do we actually mean by responsible forest management, and then to certify forests to those standards. That's what we do.
We'll talk about a subject which is close to my heart, the intact forest landscapes, IFLs. Maybe you can give us a definition?
I think intact forest landscapes is a topic that has been brought into Fsc by groups like Greenpeace for quite considerable time. What it's about is the last remaining big areas of forest that do not have industrial engagement, that do not have roads, that do not have big logging concessions, that haven't been converted to plantations. And there are some of those around the world still, in Canada, in Russia, in the Congo Basin, in the Amazon. There are some of those in Indonesia too. But there aren't many, and they're still being threatened. And I think what we're discussing and what Greenpeace has been putting pressure on us is to define the right role for Fsc in that setting. What is the role of forest certification in a setting where generally you want to see more protection, but at the same time you probably want to see forest management or responsible forest management as one of the good things that can happen in some of that space, but how do you then do that? And what is the role of Fsc in that setting?
Why we are so concerned about intact forest landscapes is that, just since 2000, for example, 8% of intact forest landscapes have disappeared. That's sort of the equivalent of 3 Germanys or the size of Egypt, right, just in the last 13 years. And when we look at intact forest landscapes, it's important to understand that they offer to the world quite a few special things. One is it offers us one of the most rich biodiversity environments, and it's almost a self-contained system. It can cope with changes in the climate, it can replenish itself and so on. Secondly, it's the home to not only small animals and so on, but big wildlife can prosper in some of these forests. That's why in Indonesia, for example, we are so concerned about the Sumatran tiger, which has been coming under threat because of impact on their intact forest landscapes. And importantly, as Kim implied, there are millions of forest-dependent peoples that live in these forests, right? So we are saying that, we need to be respectful of these communities, that they should have free, prior and informed consent about any forest management that happens, and sustainable use of intact forests by indigenous communities is something that Fsc can help us figure out how to actually do. Because we are not saying that people who live in the forests who have drawn their livelihoods for centuries in some cases. Now suddenly, everything must stop and people must be moved out and so on. And let's be blunt about it. It is these communities anyway, historically and presently, that have served as the best forest protectors when they've been given a chance to do so. So for all of these different reasons, and as well as intact forest landscapes also offer us some critically important ecosystem services from soil quality, water, and so on. And it's important also that we recognize as a carbon storage facility, intact landscape forests offer all of these things. So it's not just one thing that it's offering us so many different things, and for all of these reasons, it is critically important that we protect it. And we think that FSC, it's almost like a little bit of a new challenge from the way that FSC might have dealt with other certification processes and so on. But we have faith that it's within the capability of FSC to actually do this. We were very happy that the last General Assembly took a strong resolution from its members, which FSC is now pursuing, and we will be keeping our eyes to see whether the implementation happens by the end of 2016, which is what is envisaged.
The Motion 65 at the Global Assembly in Seville, can you tell us what it meant for FSC to have this motion approved?
It has meant a lot of follow-up activity from our side, because what the motion demanded of us was to, within a quite short time frame, to actually come up with a framework for what would FSC's role and regulations be in intact forest landscapes. So what we're doing at the moment is working with the development of new forest management standards across the chambers with economic, social and environmental interests in Canada, in Russia, in the Amazon, in the Congo Basin, in Indonesia, to come up with how do we then work in and protect intact forest landscapes inside these national standards. That's what we're working on at the moment. What it really does for us also is to take us beyond looking at the area that gets certified. Because in a sense, if you say, well, it's even a big area, it could be 1 million hectares or something, could be huge. But these intact forest landscapes are much, much bigger than any individual forest concession or national park or whatever. So we need to have a look at the whole thing and understand what is it that we as FSC, but also the other actors who need to get together there, the governments who need to develop protected areas, the international financial institutions, the indigenous peoples organizations, the local community organizations, the environment groups, how they see that whole landscape, because there's not going to be one single answer. It's not going to be everything needs to be protected areas, or everything needs to be indigenous peoples landscapes, or everything needs to be forest management. It's going to be a mix. And we need to then think about where do we fit in that mix. And that's a new thing for us as FSC, and we would like, and what we're trying to do now is, on top of what we're already doing, to develop what we would call a intact forest landscape solutions group, talking about these wider issues, getting together governments, groups like Greenpeace, groups like other environment organizations who have different opinions about this, like WWF or others, getting the indigenous peoples together to discuss how can we develop a framework together on what is it that should happen in these areas.
So of course it's important to think about carbon sequestration and aspects like that, but obviously in IFL you have economic and social aspects. So how do you feel about IFLs and from a social point of view, giving jobs to people who live in these forests?
Well, I don't see a contradiction. We are talking here about not massive numbers of people, even though when we say millions, they're not concentrated in large numbers. They have historically engaged with the forests in pretty sustainable ways anyway, and have been forest protectors to a large extent. Yes, some of these communities could benefit from support, from technical support, scientific support, material support, and so on. So overall, it's critically important that we recognize that the old dichotomy that existed in the world, which said that protecting the environment was one thing and protecting or addressing poverty is something else. We have to break that dichotomy, because if we continue to treat both of these issues as two divorced issues, we'll lose on both. right? It's only by bringing these two issues together, understanding where the intersections are, and ensuring that we're having a win for the environment and a win for people at the same time, will we move forward. And as Kim said, you know, the struggle that we are engaged in at a more macro level is whether humanity can fashion a way to coexist with nature in a mutually interdependent relationship for centuries and centuries to come.
I think one of the problems we had in the beginning, or other stakeholders inside FSC had in the beginning with Greenpeace's push for intact forest landscapes, was that it was seen as if Greenpeace thought that certification was part of the problem for intact forest landscapes, whereas we actually see it as part of the solution. If we had everything certified and everything as production landscapes, that would be bad. But if we had everything protected, that would also be bad, because I don't think we could uphold it. We would have corruption that would lead to enormous problems. We would have overruling of local rights. We would have all sorts of problems inside that. And I think if you see it as a wider landscape of different types of activities, of protected areas here, indigenous groups landscapes here, forest management here, then forest management could become part of the solution. I mean, gorillas and elephants and tigers can very well live in forests that are well managed. That's not a problem for them. But they need to be intact still. They need to have a level of being a forest. And I think that's exactly what FSC can guarantee, that the forest will be there forever.